Hi, everyone. My name is Freya Higgins-Desbiolles. I'm speaking to you from Adelaide in Australia. I was asked by your lecturer to talk to you about a new book that I've co-edited called Activating Critical Thinking to Advance the Sustainable Development Goals in Tourism Systems with my co-editors Carla Bullock and Christina Cavalieri. I understand this is going to be a reading in your studies in your course. So I just wanted to introduce the ideas to you and give you an idea about what we're talking about. Now, I'm sure you've studied sustainable development and been introduced to the idea that the term could be vague, it's been criticized, and also that there's tensions in it. It's been called an oxymoron, with the idea that sustainable is in conflict or tension with the word development and human use of resources. Now, in our introduction to the special issue, to the book, the edited volume, we talked about the failure of the Millennium Development Goals, and that being the foundations for why the Sustainable Development Goals were picked up in 2015. Particularly, it was seen to be very important to involve developed and developing countries into the efforts for sustainability. In our opening, we offer a framework and we say critical thinking, critical analysis is very important to securing the Sustainable Development Goals. The framework we proposed included critical tourism scholarship, gender, indigenous perspectives and other worldviews, degrowth in the circular economy, the importance of governance and planning, and finally, ethical consumption. So you'll find chapters in the book that touch upon each of those topics. So with teaching is sort of very important about getting the capacities for critical thinking and critical scholarship that we need to actually make sure the tourism industry is guided toward stronger sustainability. So in that effort, Deb Cotterill and her colleagues wrote about a study they did with participation from universities around the world about the coursework. And they did an evaluation of whether those courses were working from concepts of sustainability that were strong versus those that were weak. And it was an important finding for how far we're getting in the critical education within universities and tourism courses in particular. Michael Hall, one of the elders of tourism studies, offered his critical analysis of the Sustainable Development Goals and was critical about the approaches because he called it managerialism. And there's a question about whether they're actually strong in efficacy when it's approached through managerialism. Barai and her co-authors dealt with the issue of responsible tourism and the principles of responsible tourism and challenged what the contribution is of responsible tourism thinking to developing sustainability within tourism and applying the Sustainable Development Goals. Gender is a key issue. That was our second pillar. And we had 3 articles that contributed on that. Moreno, Alarcon, and Cole wrote about gender being the key to all 17 goals rather than just sitting within one goal as it currently is by the UN. That's goal 5 where it sits. They found that women and gender issues underpin attainment of all of the goals, all 17 of them. Koo Lattimore and her co-authors studied UN World Tourism Organization events and asked whether there was good gender equity and representation at these events, and they found that missing. Finally, Professor Kato from Japan wrote about her studies of women traditional divers in Japan, and she explained how they both build community, keep traditions going, and also that they protect ecology. And as I said, her approach is a feminist ecology. So very interesting study she did. That moves us into the third pillar of the framework we proposed, which explained that indigenous ways, indigenous knowledges, and indigenous worldviews might guide us in a way to better attain sustainability because indigenous peoples live in relatedness to people, environment, and all beings within these environments in a holistic way. And that interrelatedness may be something we could learn from. And other worldviews are also important to this. So for instance, I respect an article written in 1995 by Sohail Inayatullah, giving an Islamic perspective of tourism, which was very rich. In terms of the book, you'll find 2 chapters that are particularly relevant to this topic. That is Stumpf and Cheshire's chapter, about their studies in Micronesia. And they explained from the Micronesian indigenous worldview, they don't define poverty the way that we do. And therefore the goals might not be relevant because of that different cultural interface. They also talk about the fact of the care for the environment and how tourism might sit in tension with that. Lyon and Hunter Jones did a study of the Watersburg Biosphere Reserve in South Africa, and their study found that the decisions made for the reserve were top-down approaches, and that there were severely unequal power relations, and that we need to think about this when we're trying to attain sustainability and ensure fairness for all peoples in the community. In this case, it's the Black South African community that have been disempowered with apartheid, and then the transition from apartheid still sees inequality in their community and in their context. The fourth pillar is degrowth in the circular economy. This comes from a view that neoliberalism with its pro-growth dynamics undermines sustainability, and that we need to find other ways, such as circular economy thinking, the donut model. People are talking about regenerative tourism, those kinds of things. The fifth pillar is about governance and planning in tourism, which is really important to ensuring that the tourism industry transitions to holistic sustainability. We argue that justice concerns are very, very important to attaining this. Within the book, you'll find 2 chapters in particular that talk about work and employment and how tourism and hospitality can offer difficult context for the workers, and we need to be conscious of them as we attempt to secure the sustainable development goals in the tourism industry and in tourism operations. So Robinson here in Australia wrote about precarity of workers, and we see this, for instance, with the gig economy, poor conditions, casual jobs, precarious positions, 0-hour contracts, those things. So they can't have sustainable careers in an industry that treats them as precarious workers and uses them. And unfairly uses them. The second chapter about work was by Winchenbach and her co-authors, and she wrote about the value of dignity in work and identity through work, and thought about, do tourism and hospitality jobs actually fulfill that? And then the last pillar of the framework that we developed in the book was about ethical consumption. So one of the sustainable development goals focuses on sustainable production and consumption. So we looked at the idea of the consumers being catalyst in the tourism industry and how they can prompt businesses and governments to enforce and create sustainable practices. The chapter that was relevant for this was written by myself and my colleague Gayatri Wijasinha. We did a study here in Australia of 20 cafes and restaurants, and we found that sustainability practices were evident, innovative sustainability practices across the 3-pillar model, and that they were actually changing their communities and their consumers, as well as other stakeholders, with practices to sustainability. So that's my attempt to give you the contents of the book in a nutshell, hopefully excite you about it, and I hope you enjoy it. I invite any feedback from you. You can find me on the web with my email address, and I hope you enjoy the course. I've loved speaking to you. Thank you for listening to me. All the best and take care.